This is an IBM Personal Wheelwriter, outfitted with the printer option. This is not very common, and I've been trying to get my hands on one of these for years. So today we're going to be taking a look at this printer, and more specifically taking a look at that printer option, because there is almost no information out there. So I'm actually going to take it apart and document it as best I can, while we also enjoy just how cool it is. Now, the idea of connecting a typewriter to a computer as a printer is a subject that I covered in a previous video when I used a Smith Corona Ultrasonic 350 Messenger with an IBM PC. In that video, I also went over some of the economics of why it wasn't always reasonable to do this, and how printers weren't really a bad option. If you want to know more about the idea of using a typewriter as a printer, I highly recommend you go check that video out, because today I want to more focus on this particular typewriter, because unlike the Smith Corona, this one had to be slightly modified in order to function as a printer. Now, if you're not familiar with the IBM Personal Wheelwriter, let me go ahead and give you some details on them, because they are pretty awesome. The first Wheelwriters replaced the Selectric line in 1984, which led to one of their most popular facts now, that the key switches on them are identical to those of a Model M, because they use the same buckling spring mechanism that they had designed at the time. So much so that the keys themselves are even physically compatible with each other. And I have a video that goes into more detail on this fact when I had to bolt mod a Wheelwriter 3 because the keyboard completely fell apart, just like what can happen to Model Ms. Now, back to some topics about this more as a typewriter. The Wheelwriter gets its namesake from the daisy wheel style typing element that it uses. These replace the Selectric spherical typing elements, and neither of these typing elements were really invented by IBM, no matter how much they'd like you to forget that the Hammond typewriters existed, but these were very good options at the time that IBM were significant in popularizing. A daisy wheel like this works by striking the back of the disc with a hammer that will then press through the ribbon, which I've removed here, and leave the character on the paper. It has to spin the disc to rotate to the correct character that you want to leave an impression of. The Wheelwriter is also smart enough to go directly from one character to the next if you're typing quickly, rather than going to the home position first. And lastly, it uses film ribbon, which produces a sharp and dark text. And that wraps it up for the important things you need to know about the Personal Wheelwriter as a typewriter. But today, we're taking a look at it as a printer. So let's start off by taking a look at that. Around the back, we can see that it just has a standard Centronics serial port. All of the intelligence for what makes this thing work as a printer is built into it, as an add-in that you would have to disassemble it to install. This is in contrast to the Smith Corona Messenger that I showed that used an external module to achieve this, making this a slightly more complicated typewriter to use like this, and much less common to see in the wild. Now, to demonstrate this, I could very easily just take a parallel to USB adapter and plug this into a modern computer, and that's what I did in the intro, we'll be doing again later. But I thought it would be more fun to first take a look at this by using it with a computer that it would have been used with during its time when it was originally released. This is my IBM PS2 Model 70. It has a 386 Intel processor, and as near as I can tell, these two devices were likely released in the same year. So this is a perfect match, an IBM computer with the IBM Wheelwriter. Now, plugging the Wheelwriter into the PS2 is extremely simple because we're just going to use a regular printer cable to plug it straight in. No adapter modules or any other weird things are needed. All right, that is it, hooked up and ready to go. Now, I'm going to be using BASIC on my Model 70 here because I still haven't had a chance to fix the floppy drive, but I can do everything I need to with L-prints from here, so that's not going to be an issue at all. All right, now that we're in, we are almost ready to print. There is just one more thing that has to be done on the Wheelwriter, and that is to press code 5. Thankfully, the Wheelwriter's print option came with labels that were applied to it to show you how to use it. The Smith Corona I got did not have that, and I had no idea how to enable the printer, which is exactly what you have to do with code 5. This turns it on so that it is ready to acknowledge printer commands from the computer. You also can toggle the online status and set the form information. The form feed is only for continuous sheet paper though. When you feed in some continuous paper, you need to bring it up to the first line of the the sheet and then set form set. Then you can use form feed to get to the next sheet of paper that is all connected. I can't see a way of adjusting the form length though, and I'm not sure if you can. That might be something you could look up in the manual if that's ever found. But with that done and set up, the printer is ready to go. So let's do a basic lprint test here and see this work. Oh yeah. Now let's get in a little bit closer and try that out again. Now, if you're familiar with printers from this area, you may have just noticed one of the drawbacks of this thing. It's not very fast. Now, the Smith Corona I showed in the last video on this subject is only rated for about 12 characters per second. I'm not sure how fast the Wheelwriter is going to be rated for, and really it's completely variable based on where the characters are on the daisy wheel, as you saw, because that really affects the print time. So this is not an easy thing to judge, but let's go ahead and try and print a few more things to get a bit of a feel for it, because yeah, it's really not that quick. Now, to demo this a bit more, I've written a short program here that should attempt to print out all the characters that I probably can get out of this thing, at least all the ones I could easily type on the keyboard. So we'll see how this does. I think one or two of these lines may fail with the special characters though, because they're kind of strange, and I think it skips over characters it doesn't have. So as you can see, it's not that fast considering how many characters it really printed there, and yeah, the one line threw it off, so ignore the pause there. As I'm editing this, I'm noticing even more details about how slow this thing is, and I kind of just wanted to get them out there because I can't believe IBM released this thing with how terribly slow it is. It's cool, but I can't believe anybody would have been satisfied with this thing when it was new. So a Wheelwriter apparently has a rated print speed of 16 characters per second. That's probably fine if you're typing, but that's really not great for a printer. And what's even worse is it can't hit that. I only managed to see it hit that one time in this whole video, and it'll be at the end when it prints 80 characters in a row that are all the same character. It prints all 80 in exactly 5 seconds. So it's only under the most ideal circumstances that it can actually hit its rated speed of 16 characters per second. At all other times, it's slowed down while it's rotating the wheel to go from one character to the next. That is actually so slow that I can outpace it by typing 2 characters repeatedly that are on opposite ends of the wheel, and you can see that it has to buffer it to catch up. Additionally, if we look back at the Smith Corona, you can see that it's printing when it goes from left to right and right to left. The Wheelwriter only prints when going from left to right and then has to throw the carriage all the way back to the left before it'll start printing again. Now, I could understand thinking that this is a typewriter, not a printer, so it's not going to be that fast, except that Smith Corona is way better. But even worse is the fact that 1 year after IBM released the first Wheelwriter, they released the IBM Wheel Printer, which was a printer version of the Wheelwriter. So clearly, this was the plan all along. That wheel printer is rated at 26 characters per second, but still has flaws like the Wheelwriter, like not printing in reverse. So really, this was just poorly conceived, and I'm just kind of surprised that it's like this, because IBM is usually better than that. But anyway, that's enough stuff I've noticed in editing, and let's get back to actually playing around with it, because as frustratingly slow as it is, it's still really cool. Now, as fun as it is to use this with a computer from the era that it was made for, and kind of made of since they're both buckling springs, I think it would be better to move on to using a modern computer to show off the rest of its capabilities. But before we do that, I want to take this thing apart and fully document that printer option since there's so little out there. Now, taking apart a Wheelwriter isn't all that difficult. It's actually toolless, but can be a little tricky. There are tabs in the rear that you need to push in, and then you can lift up the beige case from the brown base. After that, the top just slides off and you have the keyboard fully exposed. In order to get to the logic board, which is under the keyboard, there are some snaps up above that you need to push in, and then the keyboard lifts up. Underneath of the keyboard resides the main logic board and is where the printer option is actually installed. There's a ribbon cable that runs underneath of the mechanical workings to a printer connector, which is just a PCB with basically a big ferrite core on it so that it doesn't have as much interference. The main logic happens on a board that is plugged right in next to the main board, and as an upgrade ROM that is fit into the main board. I have a special shout out to What You See Is What You Get Protogen on Twitter for checking his Personal Wheelwriter against mine to make sure that that ROM actually did contain some different features. So I do know that that ROM needs to be dumped in order to preserve this option. Now, one of the things I wanted to do here was take some very clear and high-resolution photographs of these boards in the hopes that they can be reverse engineered, because by the looks of it, it's just using standard off-the-shelf logic chips, and this thing could very easily be recreated. So I've put the pictures and the ROM dump up on GitHub so someone else can take a crack at that. I just don't have the time for it right now, but hopefully there will be enough information there for anyone who wants to attempt that, and if there isn't, just reach out to me and I can do some more testing. But with those out, we can see that the printer option really isn't all that substantial, and comparing it next to the messenger module for the Smith Corona is kind of hilarious because it's so tiny. All right, now that that is done, it's time to check this thing out with a modern computer. Now, I'm going to be doing this from Linux, but using this on Windows wouldn't be that much more difficult. The printer driver you would use for this is just a generic text driver, because this thing accepts raw ASCII signals over the parallel port. That's all it can do. It can't do graphics or any of that kind of stuff. The only way you could do that is if you converted it to ASCII first and then tried to print it. So it is a very basic printer, but working with Linux makes this very easy because it's already a very text-based operating system. Okay, this is all connected now. I'm using root so I don't have to deal with the permissions and USB nonsense. But let's just real quick see the printer is showing up as, yep, LP0 under the dev. So what we can do here is a very simple test where we will just echo test out to that, and bingo, we are printing from a modern computer. Now we can output from here pretty much anything we want. Since Linux is so open, we could print quite a lot by just giving it some logging commands. Oh, it does not word wrap. That's hilarious. I didn't know how it handled word wrapping, but good to know. Okay, so it doesn't like just raw text that's uncontrolled, but we could probably limit the line length if we wanted to somehow. I know I've done that kind of thing before. There's all sorts of weird piping things you can do. Now, the better way of using this is for pre-formatted text. This one isn't particularly long, but this is the kind of use case that I will actually be using this for in not too long here, where you can just cat a file out over it and get that printed. There we go. And as long as you make sure that you stay within the line length, then that's not going to be too much of an issue. I am curious though, what is the line length? So I think I'm going to go ahead and create a file here. If I was feeling particularly clever, I could write something as code, but I'm just going to vim line.txt, and I'm just going to do this, this a few times. All right, how many did it do? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 zeros. So it's slightly more than 80 characters. So that's perfect. You could do a lot with 80 characters on that. It looks like it's probably 84, 85. So that's plenty of overhead. This could be centered slightly better. I didn't know where to center it for. But yeah, that's not bad. Okay, I still really wanted to see Linux hard copy logging, so I put together a command that will take the output from dmessage, wrap it to 80 columns, and replace the new lines with carriage return new lines. And I'm also only going to print the first 20 lines of it, but here we're going to be able to actually see this work, which took a lot to set up, but here we go. Yeah, it's not fast. Well, I think that wraps it up for the IBM Personal Wheelwriter printing option. There's one more thing I'm still going to be printing at the end here, but that pretty much gives you an idea of using this thing. I am still shocked that I managed to get my hands on one of these because, again, they're uncommon, and I'm just really happy to have one because I think it's so cool, and that this is just one of the best electronic typewriters you can get. I mean, they're just awesome. I'm also glad I was able to document this thing, so there's at least a hope of it being cloned, and I think it's a pretty strong chance that it could be. So hopefully someone can take that on. I really wish I could, I just don't have the time at the moment. And I hope you guys enjoyed this look and overview of this thing. It's just so cool. If you did enjoy it, you might want to subscribe, and if you want to support the channel, I am on Patreon. But for now, that's it, and now let's do the last print, which is probably going to be a lot longer than usual since this thing's so slow.